There are moments in life when a person wants nothing more than to control themselves. Not the world, not other people, just themselves. The anger that rises too fast, the hunger that speaks louder than reason, the scroll of a phone at midnight when sleep was the plan, the promise made in the morning, broken by evening. Many people spend years trying to master this. They read the books, they set the rules, they tell themselves starting tomorrow, everything will be different. And for a while it is, and then quietly it isn't. This is one of the loneliest struggles a human being can face, because it happens entirely inside. No one sees the version of you that almost said the cruel thing and didn't. No one sees the version of you that wanted to give up and kept going anyway, only to collapse later in private. Self-control looks from the outside like a simple decision. From the inside, it feels like a war. Carl Jung spent much of his life studying this exact war. Not the war between a person and the world, but the war between a person and the parts of themselves they have not yet learned to understand. And what he discovered was strange, and for many people, deeply relieving. He did not believe that self-control was primarily about willpower. He believed it was about something else entirely. Something most people never think to look for, hidden beneath the effort, beneath the discipline, beneath the failure and the shame that follows it. Jung believed that before a person ever finds real power over themselves, something has to happen first. Not a technique, not a habit, something older and quieter than that. An inner battle that almost everyone experiences, but almost no one recognizes for what it is. In this video, we are going to explore that battle. We will look at why willpower so often fails even in people who seem strong. We will look at what Jung called the shadow, and why the parts of ourselves we try hardest to suppress are often the very parts demanding to be controlled. We will look at the difference between forcing yourself into obedience and becoming someone who no longer needs to fight so hard. And by the end, you may find that the self-control you have been chasing was never missing. It was simply waiting for you to stop looking for it in the wrong place. Let's begin. There is a story most of us grow up believing, even if no one ever says it out loud. The story goes like this. Disciplined people are simply made of stronger material. They have more willpower. They were built with a kind of inner steel that the rest of us lack. And if we could only find that steel in ourselves, we would finally stop overeating, stop procrastinating, stop losing our temper, stop wasting our lives on things that do not matter. It is a comforting story in one way, because it gives us something to strive for. But it is also a cruel story, because it quietly implies that people who struggle with self-control are simply weaker, lesser, missing something essential that other, better people have. Jung did not see it this way at all. From Jung's perspective, willpower is not a muscle you either have or don't have. It is more like the visible tip of something much larger sitting beneath the surface of a person's psyche. When willpower fails, it is rarely because a person lacks strength. It is because the conscious mind, part of you making promises and setting goals, is trying to overpower something in the unconscious that it does not understand and has never been introduced to. Think about that for a moment. You make a promise to yourself in the morning. You are calm. You are rational. You can see clearly why the change matters. And yet, by evening, some other force inside you seems to override all of that clarity. And you find yourself doing the very thing you swore you wouldn't do. This is not a failure of character. Jung would say this is evidence that there is more than one you operating inside your mind, and only one of them was actually in the room when the promise was made. Jung wrote something that captures this perfectly. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Read that again slowly. He is not talking about mysticism. He is talking about something very practical. The parts of yourself you have not looked at directly. The fears you avoid naming. The needs you pretend you don't have. The old wounds you've learned to walk around instead of through. Do not disappear simply because you ignore them. They keep operating. They keep influencing your choices. And because you never see them clearly, they feel less like decisions you are making and more like something happening to you. This is why so many people describe their own self-sabotage using the language of fate or bad luck. I don't know why I always do this. It's like something takes over. I know better, but I do it anyway. These are not signs of weak character. They are descriptions, almost word for word, of what Jung called the unconscious directing a life that the conscious mind believes it controls. Here is a metaphor that might help. Imagine your mind as a house with many rooms. The conscious mind lives in the front room, the one with the windows and the door to the outside world. This is the room where you make plans, set goals, and tell yourself who you intend to be. But the house has other rooms. Some are locked, some you have never opened, some you opened once, found something painful inside, and shut quickly, promising yourself you would never go back in. The problem is that the person living in the front room believes the whole house is empty except for that one space. So when noise comes from the other rooms, when old fears rattle the pipes or old grief creaks the floorboards, the person in the front room has no idea where the sound is coming from. All they know is that despite their best intentions, something keeps disturbing the peace. Self-control in this metaphor is not about building a stronger door for the front room. It is about eventually walking through the house. Consider an ordinary example. A man decides he wants to stop losing his temper with his family. He genuinely means it. He is a kind person, and he hates the way anger makes him feel afterward. The apologies, the guilt, the small distances that grow between him and the people he loves. He tries discipline. He counts to 10. He reminds himself to stay calm. And for a while it works, until one evening, over something small, the anger arrives faster than his discipline can catch it. If we only look at the surface, this looks like a failure of self-control. But if we ask a Jungian question, a different picture appears. What was in that locked room? Perhaps as a child, this man was never allowed to express frustration. Perhaps anger in his household meant danger. And so he learned very early to suppress it entirely rather than understand it. The anger did not disappear. It went into one of the locked rooms. And now, decades later, whenever he feels dismissed or unheard, that old suppressed anger comes rushing out, disguised as an overreaction to something small. His willpower was never the problem. His unfamiliarity with a part of himself was. This is the first principle Jung offers us, and it is worth sitting with before we move further. Self-control does not begin with force. It begins with acquaintance. You cannot govern what you refuse to meet. There is something almost spiritual in this idea, even though Jung approached it through psychology rather than religion. Across many traditions, the wisest figures were not described as people who fought their inner demons into submission through sheer force. They were described as people who faced them, named them, and in doing so were no longer ruled by them. The discipline came after the understanding, not before it. This reframes the entire struggle. If you have ever felt ashamed of how hard self-control is for you, ashamed that other people seem to manage so easily while you feel like you're constantly fighting yourself, consider this possibility. Perhaps you are not weaker. Perhaps you are simply someone who has more rooms left unopened. And the good news, the very good news, is that rooms can be opened. What is unconscious can become conscious. What directs you blindly can, in time, become something you understand and choose. But to open those rooms, we first have to understand what tends to be hiding inside them. And that brings us to one of Jung's most important and most misunderstood ideas. There is an old psychological pattern that shows up across almost every culture, every era, every kind of person. It goes like this: whatever a person is taught to see as unacceptable in themselves, they learn to hide, first from others and eventually from themselves. A child who is told that sadness is weakness learns to stop crying, not just in front of people, but eventually altogether. A child who is told that ambition is arrogant learns to shrink their own desires until they barely notice them. A child who is told that anger is dangerous learns to swallow it so completely that they no longer recognize it rising in their own chest. Jung gave this hidden collection of disowned parts a name. He called it the shadow. The shadow is not evil. This is one of the most common misunderstandings of Jung's work. The shadow is simply everything about ourselves that we have pushed out of our conscious identity because, at some point, it was unsafe, unacceptable, or unrewarded to express it. It can contain rage, yes, but it can also contain tenderness, ambition, sexuality, playfulness, even joy, if those qualities were discouraged early in life. Jung wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow. And the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. This is the part that matters most for our conversation about self-control. The shadow does not go away simply because it is ignored. It goes underground, and from underground it exerts pressure. It leaks out sideways in the very moments a person is trying hardest to control themselves. Think about the person who is endlessly polite, endlessly agreeable, who never raises their voice, who prides themselves on being easygoing, until one day, over something minor, they explode in a way that shocks everyone around them, including themselves. This is not a random malfunction. This is the shadow, having been denied expression for so long, finally breaking through the surface with force that is disproportional to the moment, because it is not really about the moment. It is about years of suppressed material finally finding a crack in the wall. Or think about the person who diets with extreme discipline for weeks, only to binge in private, ashamed, wondering why they have no self-control, when in fact the opposite is true. They have tremendous control, so much control that an entire part of their needs has been silenced for so long that it eventually seizes any opportunity to be heard. However chaotic that expression looks, this is one of the most important reversals in Jungian thought, and it is worth pausing on. What looks like a lack of self-control is very often the delayed reaction to too much suppression. The rebellion is not the absence of discipline. It is what discipline turns into when it is built on suppression rather than understanding. Here is a metaphor Jung himself would likely appreciate. Imagine a river. A river that is allowed to flow naturally moves with a certain rhythm, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, shaped by the land around it, but always moving, always finding a way forward. Now imagine that same river dammed. For a while, the dam holds. The water builds up quietly behind it, invisible to anyone standing downstream. Everything looks calm, but the pressure does not disappear. It accumulates, and eventually either the dam is deliberately opened or it breaks. Suppression is the dam. The shadow is the water behind it. And what we call a loss of self-control is very often simply what happens when the pressure has been building for so long that it can no longer be contained by force alone. This reframes the entire project of self-mastery. The goal is not to build a stronger dam. Stronger dams simply delay bigger breaks. The goal, according to Jung, is to understand the river well enough that it no longer needs to be dammed in the first place. To give it channels. To let it move consciously, rather than being blocked until it bursts unconsciously. There is a historical thread here that many people find illuminating. Ancient Stoic philosophers, working centuries before psychology existed as a formal discipline, arrived at a strikingly similar insight through a different path. They did not advocate for the suppression of emotion. They advocated for understanding emotion clearly enough that it no longer controlled behavior automatically. Anger, they argued, was dangerous not because it existed, but because it was misunderstood and therefore unmanaged. The goal was never to become a person without feeling. The goal was to become a person who understood feeling so well that feeling no longer dictated action without permission. Jung, working with the language of the unconscious rather than the language of virtue, arrived at nearly the same place. Self-mastery is not the absence of the shadow. It is the integration of it. Not banishment, not denial, acquaintance, and eventually cooperation. This might sound abstract, so let's bring it into something practical. If you find yourself repeatedly failing at the same form of self-control, whether it is your temper, your eating, your spending, your procrastination, your relationship to your phone, Jung would ask a very different question than most self-help advice asks. Instead of asking, "How do I force myself to stop this?" he would ask, "What need is this behavior secretly meeting? And what happens if I try to meet that need consciously instead?" The person who cannot stop checking their phone late at night is very often not lacking discipline. They are often starving for a kind of stimulation, distraction, or connection that their daytime life is not providing. The behavior is not the disease. It is a symptom, a signal pointing towards something the person has not yet consciously acknowledged they need. This does not mean the behavior should simply continue unchecked. It means that force alone will rarely resolve it, because force is aimed at the symptom, while the real cause remains untouched, waiting behind the dam, gathering pressure for the next release. There is an old piece of mythology that captures this idea with unusual precision, even though it was written long before anyone used the word psychology. In many ancient stories, the hero does not defeat the monster by refusing to look at it. The monster often has to be faced directly, sometimes even spoken with, before it loses its power. The dragon guarding the treasure is rarely destroyed through avoidance. It is confronted, and in the confrontation, something shifts, not always through violence, but through recognition. The hero who turns away from the cave, who pretends the dragon isn't there, never reaches the treasure at all. They simply live nearby, forever aware of what they never faced. Jung was fascinated by these old stories not because he believed in dragons, but because he believed myths were a kind of ancient psychology, encoded in symbol rather than clinical language. The dragon, in his reading, was never really an external beast. It was the shadow, and the treasure it guarded was never gold. It was wholeness, the very thing a person becomes capable of once they stop running from the parts of themselves they were taught to fear. This is worth sitting with because it reframes suppression not as safety but as a kind of exile. When we refuse to face the difficult parts of ourselves, we are not protecting ourselves from the dragon. We are simply choosing to live forever outside the cave, never reaching what waits on the other side of that confrontation. Something deeper begins to take shape here. Real self-control, the kind that lasts, the kind that does not require constant white-knuckled effort, seems to depend less on fighting yourself and more on finally listening to yourself. And listening, as it turns out, requires a very specific kind of courage. Because the parts of us we have buried were usually buried for a reason. They often carry the old pain, and to listen to them means being willing to feel that pain again, this time with eyes open. This is where the real battle begins. Not the battle between you and your bad habits, the battle between the part of you that wants to keep the locked rooms closed and the part of you that senses quietly that opening them is the only way forward. Every person who has ever tried to become more disciplined, more controlled, more consistent, eventually runs into a strange and uncomfortable experience. It feels at times like there are two people living inside one body, and they do not agree with each other. One version of you wants to wake up early, eat well, work with focus, speak kindly, and follow through on every promise made to yourself. This version of you is easy to like. It is the version you present in interviews, on good days, in your imagination of who you're becoming. But there is another version. This version wants to stay in bed, wants to eat the thing that isn't good for you, wants to say the sharp comment instead of the kind one, wants to give up the moment things get difficult. This version is harder to admit to. Many people spend years pretending this version barely exists, as though it is a minor inconvenience rather than a real force within them. Jung had a name for the first version. He called it the persona, the mask a person shows the world, the curated identity built from social expectation, ambition, and the desire to be seen a certain way. The persona is not fake, exactly. It is simply partial. It is the version of you built for public life. But behind the persona lives something Jung called the self, not the small, everyday sense of identity, but the whole psyche, conscious and unconscious together. Everything you are, not just everything you show. Here is the uncomfortable truth Jung uncovered. The more a person builds their identity entirely around the persona, entirely around being disciplined, composed, and in control, the more violently the disowned parts of themselves eventually resurface. Because a mask, no matter how well constructed, cannot actually contain a whole person, can only cover them. Jung wrote something striking about this tension. The persona is a mask, and it costs a great deal to keep it in place. Think about how much energy it takes to appear endlessly composed, to never show the frustration, to never admit the exhaustion, to always be the reliable one, the strong one, the one who has it together. Many people carry this mask for years, and it works until the cost of maintaining it becomes greater than the reward of wearing it, and something inside begins to crack. This is often where what looks like a collapse of self-control actually begins. The sudden outburst after months of composure, the affair after years of a picture-perfect marriage, the breakdown after a decade of relentless achievement. From the outside, these look like failures of discipline. From the inside, and from a Jungian lens, They are almost always the self, the whole self, finally refusing to be represented entirely by the mask any longer. There is a metaphor worth sitting with here. Picture two actors sharing one stage, but only one of them has been given lines. The other stands in the wings, night after night, watching, waiting, growing more restless with each performance that ignores their existence. For a while, they wait patiently, but eventually they will find a way onto the stage, whether they are invited or not, and their entrance is rarely graceful because it has been delayed for so long. This is what happens when self-control becomes entirely about managing the persona while ignoring the self. It is not sustainable because it is not whole. Real self-mastery, Jung suggests, does not mean strengthening the persona until it never cracks. It means slowly, honestly, giving the unseen actor a role in the story so that they no longer need to force their way onto the stage through chaos. Let's look at an example drawn from an everyday kind of life rather than an extraordinary one. Consider a woman who has built her entire identity around being capable. At work, she is the one everyone relies on. At home, she manages everything without complaint. She prides herself on never needing help, on always being the strong one others lean on. For years, this works beautifully, at least from the outside. But somewhere beneath that competence lives a tired, overwhelmed person who has never once been allowed to say, "I can't do this alone." That part of her was buried early, perhaps in a childhood where needing help was treated as a burden to others. And so it waits quietly, in the wings. Then one day, over something small, a missed meeting, a minor criticism, she finds herself crying in her car for reasons she cannot fully explain, followed by weeks of uncharacteristic exhaustion, irritability, and a complete inability to focus. To everyone around her, this looks like she has suddenly, mysteriously, lost her composure. In truth, the composure was never the whole story. It was the mask, and the self beneath it had simply been waiting for a long time to be acknowledged. This is the war Jung is describing when he speaks of the psyche's inner conflict. It is not a war between good and bad. It is a war between what we allow ourselves to be seen as and what we actually are. And self-control, real self-control, cannot be built entirely on the side of the mask. It has to include the whole person, even the parts that are inconvenient, even the parts that don't photograph well. There is something important to say here, because this idea can easily be misread as an excuse to abandon discipline altogether, to simply let it all out in the name of authenticity. That is not what Jung is describing, and it is worth being precise about the difference. Integration is not indulgence. Acknowledging the tired, angry, needy, imperfect parts of yourself does not mean handing them the steering wheel. It means finally letting them into the car so they stop trying to grab the wheel from the back seat when you least expect it. This is a subtle but crucial distinction. A person who suppresses their anger entirely is at the mercy of it, because it operates outside their awareness, choosing its own moments to erupt. A person who indulges their anger entirely is also at its mercy, simply in a different direction. But a person who has met their anger, understood where it comes from, and learned its language, can feel it rise and choose, consciously, what to do with it. This is not the absence of self-control. This is the presence of a self-control so complete that it no longer requires constant vigilance, because there is no longer a hidden war being fought in the dark. This is what Jung means when he speaks of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming a whole person rather than a curated fragment of one. And it is here that we begin to see why the title of this exploration holds true. Before real power over yourself arrives, this inner battle between the mask and the self, between the persona and the shadow, almost always happens first. It is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is a sign that something true is finally being allowed to surface. But recognizing this battle is only the beginning. The next question is what actually changes once a person stops fighting the war on the front and starts fighting it on the right one. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from years of white-knuckled self-control. The kind built entirely on force, on gritted teeth, on refusing to acknowledge weakness. People who live this way often achieve a great deal. They are disciplined, productive, admired. But there is a quiet cost that rarely shows up on the outside. They are tired in a way that rest does not seem to fix, because the exhaustion is not physical. It is the exhaustion of holding a door closed against something that keeps pushing from the other side. Jung's work points toward a different kind of self-mastery, one that does not require this constant, draining effort. And the transition toward it tends to follow a recognizable pattern, even though every individual's path looks slightly different. The first change is usually a shift from judgment to curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why do I keep failing at this?" a person begins asking, "What is this behavior trying to tell me?" This single shift changes everything, because judgment closes a door, while curiosity opens one. When you judge a craving, an outburst, a moment of weakness, you push it further into the shadow, where it will only grow stronger and more disruptive. When you become curious about it, you begin slowly to understand it, and understanding is the beginning of choice. Consider a man who has struggled for years with procrastination, particularly around tasks that matter most to him. For a long time, he assumes this means he is lazy or undisciplined, and he berates himself accordingly, which, predictably, does nothing to solve the problem. It rarely does. But when he finally becomes curious instead of critical, he notices something surprising. He does not procrastinate on tasks that don't matter. He procrastinates specifically on the ones that matter most, the ones where failure would hurt the most. Because failing at something he never fully tried, it feels safer than failing at something he gave everything to. His procrastination was never about laziness. It was protection, a way of keeping a fragile sense of self-worth from being tested too directly. Once he sees this clearly, the behavior does not vanish overnight, but something fundamental shifts. He is no longer fighting a mysterious enemy called laziness. He is working with a frightened part of himself that needed to be understood, not defeated. This is the second major change that tends to follow. The relationship with the difficult parts of the self moves from combat to collaboration. Jung often described psychological health not as the elimination of inner conflict, but as a kind of ongoing dialogue between the different parts of the psyche, the conscious and the unconscious, the persona and the shadow, working together rather than at war. This does not mean the difficult feelings disappear. The anger still arises, the fear still whispers, the old wounds still ache sometimes. But there is a difference between a feeling that controls you because it is unseen, and a feeling that visits you because it is known. The second kind is far easier to live with because it no longer arrives as an ambush. It arrives as a familiar guest, one you have learned to recognize, and one you no longer have to fear. The third change is subtler, and it is perhaps the most important. As a person becomes more familiar with their own shadow, their own suppressed needs and fears, something begins to happen to their self-control that looks almost paradoxical. It requires less effort. This surprises people, because our culture tends to associate discipline with strain, with gritted teeth, with pushing through resistance. But Jung-Soo Wook suggests that a great deal of what feels like resistance is actually internal conflict, energy spent fighting a part of yourself you have not yet acknowledged. When that conflict eases, because the hidden part has finally been heard, an enormous amount of energy that was previously spent on internal warfare becomes available for something else entirely. Living. Think of it this way. Imagine spending years trying to walk forward while simultaneously holding a door shut behind you. A door that something keeps pushing against. Of course you're exhausted. Of course progress feels slow and effortful. Now imagine finally turning around, opening that door, and discovering that whatever was pushing against it simply wanted to be let into the house, not to destroy it. The moment you stop needing both hands to hold the door, you have both hands free to walk. This is what people often describe, somewhat mysteriously, as an inner shift after real self-reflection. They say things like, "I don't know what changed, but it doesn't feel like such a fight anymore." What has changed is not that the difficult parts of themselves vanished. What has changed is that they are no longer being held shut behind a locked door, spending energy neither the person nor the door can spare. There is a quiet historical echo of this idea in how ancient traditions spoke of self-mastery. Long before modern psychology gave it new language, many spiritual traditions describe wisdom not as the absence of desire, anger, or fear, but as a mature relationship with them, one in which these forces are acknowledged, understood, and, in time, no longer command unconscious obedience. The wise figure in these traditions is rarely depicted as someone without a shadow. They are depicted as someone who has walked into it and returned. Consider another everyday example, one that many people will recognize immediately. A woman has tried for years to build a consistent habit of exercise. She has tried strict schedules, harsh self-talk, elaborate reward systems, all with the same result. A strong start followed by a slow collapse a few weeks in, followed by guilt, followed by another strict attempt to begin again. From the outside, this looks like a simple lack of discipline. She herself has come to believe this about herself, repeating it almost like a diagnosis. I just don't have the willpower other people have. But when she finally slows down enough to get curious rather than critical, she notices something she had never let herself see clearly before. Her collapses always happen during the weeks she is most overwhelmed at work, most emotionally depleted, most in need of rest rather than exertion. Her body was never failing to comply with her willpower. It was communicating an actual need, one her conscious mind had decided to override every single time in favor of the plan. The failure was never a failure of discipline. It was a refusal to listen. Once she understands this, something shifts, not overnight, but steadily. She begins building rest into her plan rather than treating it as the enemy of progress. She begins asking, before pushing herself, whether the resistance she feels is laziness or genuine depletion, and she is often surprised by her own honest answer. Her consistency, when it finally arrives, does not look like more force. It looks like less internal conflict because the plan she is following now includes the part of her that used to sabotage it in silence. This reframes what self-control actually means. It is not the absence of an inner battle. It is the resolution of one, a battle that had to happen first. Exactly as this video's opening promised, before real power arrives, before self-mastery stops feeling like exhausting effort and starts feeling like quiet steadiness, the person must go through this confrontation with the parts of themselves they had learned to fear, avoid, or deny. This is often the part of the journey people resist the most because it requires something our culture rarely teaches: the willingness to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to fix, suppress, or distract from it. If you have ever felt a wave of old sadness, your old anger rise up during quiet moments with no obvious cause, you may have brushed past it quickly, reaching for a phone, a task, a distraction. It is worth asking gently, without judgment, what might happen if you simply let that feeling stay in the room a little longer next time. Not to be consumed by it, just to become acquainted with it. If this resonates with you, you might try something small. The next time you notice a moment of losing control, whether it is snapping at someone you love, reaching for a habit you wish you didn't have, or avoiding something important, pause afterward, and instead of judging yourself, ask a single quiet question. What did I need in that moment that I didn't know how to ask for? You don't need a perfect answer. Just sit with the question. Many people find it useful to write down in a single word what surfaces: fear, tiredness, loneliness, overwhelm. If you'd like, you can share that single word in the comments below this video. Sometimes naming it, even briefly, even to strangers, is the first step of the very process Jung describes. This process, this movement from war to dialogue, from suppression to acquaintance, from exhausting effort to quiet steadiness, is what Jung called individuation. And it leads to the final piece of this journey, the part where a person stops merely managing themselves and begins, in a much deeper sense, becoming themselves. There is a particular kind of person you may have met once or twice in your life. They are not loud about their discipline. They don't need to announce their boundaries or defend their choices. They simply seem steady, calm in situations that would rattle most people, consistent without appearing to try very hard at it. It can almost feel unfair watching someone move through the world with that kind of quiet ease, especially if your own experience of self-control has always felt like a struggle. What is easy to miss from the outside is that this steadiness was very rarely a starting point. It is almost always the outcome of exactly the process we have been describing throughout this video. Somewhere earlier in that person's life, there was confusion. There were locked rooms. There was a persona working overtime to hide a shadow it didn't yet understand. There were outbursts or breakdowns, or quiet private struggles that no one else ever saw. The steadiness did not arrive first. It arrived after the battle, not before it. This is important to understand because it reframes how we should think about our own struggles with self-control. If you are currently in the middle of that battle, if you find your discipline fragile, your patience short, your habits inconsistent despite your best intentions, this is not evidence that you are behind or broken or lacking something essential that other people have. It may simply mean you are in the part of the process that comes before the steadiness, not after it. And that part, uncomfortable as it is not a detour from growth. It is growth. Jung believed that wholeness, not perfection, was the true goal of psychological development. This distinction matters enormously. Perfection asks you to eliminate your flaws, your fears, your inconvenient needs. Wholeness asks you to include them, to build a life and an identity spacious enough to hold every part of who you are, not just the parts that photograph well. Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Notice what this quote does not say. It does not say a person can simply erase what happened to them, or the parts of themselves shaped by it. It says something more honest and more hopeful. What happened to you does not have to remain the final word. But the way forward is not through denial of it. It is through conscious choice, made possible only once that history, and the parts of yourself formed by it, have been acknowledged rather than buried. This is the deeper meaning behind self-control, from a Jungian perspective. It was never really about willpower in the narrow sense most people imagine, the ability to grit your teeth and refuse temptation through sheer force. It is about the ongoing project of becoming a person whose conscious values and unconscious needs are no longer at war with each other. When that war eases, self-control stops feeling like something you have to fight for every single day. It becomes something closer to who you simply are. Think back to the metaphor of the house. In the beginning, the person in the front room believed the house was small, contained, fully known. Over the course of this exploration, room by room, they have walked further in. They have found the anger that was never allowed to be expressed. They have found the exhaustion hidden behind years of relentless competence. They have found the tenderness that got buried beneath a mask of toughness, and the ambition that got buried beneath a fear of being too much. Each room, once entered, stops rattling in the dark and becomes simply another part of the home. This is not a quick process. It is not meant to be. Jung's own understanding of individuation unfolded over an entire lifetime. Not a single insight or a single video, but every honest step into a previously locked room changes something. The house becomes a little more known, a little more whole, and the person living in it becomes a little less afraid of the noises coming from within their own walls. It is worth pausing here to notice how differently this journey unfolds compared to the one most of us were taught to expect. We are often told that self-mastery is a straight line. Identify the flaw, apply enough discipline, watch the flaw disappear. But the process Jung describes is not a straight line at all. It moves in loops. A person will face a part of their shadow, feel a season of relief, and then, months later, find themselves confronting a different, deeper layer of the same old wound, one that was only accessible once the first layer had been faced. This is not regression. It is depth. The house, remember, has many rooms, and some rooms lead to others that could not have been reached any other way. This is why patience matters so much in this work, perhaps more than any single technique or insight. A person who expects a single realization to permanently resolve their struggle with self-control will often feel discouraged when old patterns quietly resurface later in life, under new pressures, in new disguises. But a person who understands individuation as an ongoing relationship, rather than a finished achievement, meets these returns with far less despair. They recognize the old anger, the old fear, the old ache, not as evidence that nothing has changed, but as an invitation to walk a little further into a room they have already begun to know. There is a kind of freedom in this that is easy to underestimate until you feel it. When you no longer fear your own shadow, you stop needing so much energy to keep it hidden. When you no longer judge your own difficult feelings, you stop needing so much energy to suppress them. And all of that reclaimed energy becomes available for something far more valuable than constant self-management. It becomes available for living, fully, honestly, as a whole person rather than a carefully maintained performance of one. This is, in the end, what real self-control looks like. Not a person who has eliminated their weaknesses, but a person who has stopped being at war with them. Not a person without a shadow, but a person who has walked into it and found that what waited there was not a monster to be defeated, but a part of themselves waiting patiently all along simply to be known. If you recognize yourself somewhere in this video, in the exhausting effort of trying to hold yourself together through force alone, in the confusion of failing at the same thing over and over despite your best intentions, in the quiet ache of a part of yourself you have never quite let anyone see, know that this is not a sign you are failing at self-mastery. It may simply be a sign that the inner battle Jung described has already begun in you. And if it has begun, then the steadiness so many people seem to carry so effortlessly is not out of reach. It is simply waiting on the other side of a door you have not yet opened. You do not need to open every room today. You only need to be willing, when the moment comes, to walk a little further into the house that has been yours all along. If this reflection meant something to you, consider sharing in a single sentence which part of this resonated most. Sometimes putting words to it, even briefly, is where the real change begins. And if you would like to continue exploring these ideas together, consider staying a while longer here as we keep walking gently into the deeper rooms of what it means to become whole.